Our topic is student engagement, what it looks like, and how to get it in your classroom.
Thank you. And I'm going to be podcasting this as we speak. So we have the video going. I have my voiceover slide podcast going. So the whole world will probably blow up before we're done here. But I'm going to talk to you about some of the interactive technologies and techniques that I've used in the classroom successfully and unsuccessfully, because sometimes it's a mixed bag. Some of the lessons I've learned, some of the actual things I do, some advice if you think maybe you want to integrate some of these things. And then, of course, we'll have time at the end to chat about these things. But just a little bit about my class. It's a little unusual, I think. It is a 3-hour weekly course. I usually have 60 students, so it's a fairly big class. So you might wonder, well, how the heck does he get engagement in that class? Well, I'm going to show you. My teaching philosophy is that I try to target as many of the different learning styles as possible. So I'm a multimodal learner, so I want my students to try to be engaged in that as well. And I also firmly believe that ethics education is not a one-time thing, it's a lifelong experience. So they're getting a dose here. They will get a dose when they hit their clinicals, because that's real life. And then when they get into practice, of course, they get the big dose. And they need a booster somewhere along the way for protection. Here are the books I use, fairly standard books. I try to make the class as clinically relevant as possible. I know that many of my colleagues in bioethics, they teach sort of an overview of the entire field of bioethics. I want my nurses to be prepared when they hit the floors, when they hit the units, to know all the things that they need to do to be good practitioners. So I don't talk about stem cells and all that other sexy stuff. I talk about more of the quotidian ethics that arises in clinical care. And I should also tell you, I'm not a nurse. I'm an FON, a friend of nursing. My wife is a nurse. I think Adam, Cher, and I are the only two people in the school who have spouses as nurses, and therefore we qualify to teach in the school. Here's what we do each class. It's a 3-hour class, so there's a lot of stuff I need to accomplish, but it's 3 hours from 5 to 8 on a Monday night, after students, usually sophomores, usually take the course. They've gone all the way from 8 o'clock in the morning usually. So I get them towards the tail end. The first thing I want to do is have some kind of measure of have they actually read the assignment. 5-question quiz, or if they like, they can do an outline of their own choosing, or I post redacted slides that I'm going to lecture on, and they can fill in the blanks based on the readings. Then I usually give some kind of introductory lecture with a Q&A. I was funded through the innovation program here to develop some podcasts, which I was only going to use for my class, but then I was like, hey, this is good stuff. So we threw it on iTunes University and on YouTube, and they're quite popular and got positively reviewed, actually, in a couple of peer-reviewed journals. So I've actually been testing the use of those podcasts as the lecture, because me being, absent-minded professor tangential, will go off on all kinds of tangents, and podcast is a nice 15-minute segment, and then I can come back at the end and say, what questions do you have? What do we need to discuss? Things of that nature. But I give the students a choice. I'm like, you can either have me doing this live, or you can have the nice compact podcast. Then we spend the entire rest of the time, so probably about 2 hours worth, on doing simulated realistic ethics cases, and they sort of play the role of patients, clinicians, family members, grappling with an ethical issue, and some group of students, whether it's the whole class or a subset, depending on the assignment, are sort of the ethics advisors and facilitators that help them solve those problems. And so I use that to stimulate and simulate their ethical thinking and ethical leadership. I use a framework that's very common in medicine and nursing that, basically you want to assess, then you want to have some kind of options, you want to implement those options, and then you want to evaluate what you've done. So that's essentially the framework that I use. Embedded in that are some ethical tools that I teach them, but essentially that's the framework. And the idea there is to ingrain that. I want them to have that as an ethics toolbox. When they go out, they'll always remember to use these 4 stages of critical thinking and clinical judgment. This is a very complex build to show you sort of what I actually do. So here's where I actually combine all the different learning theories in the class. So they can read, they can listen, they can see, and they can do. They can do all those things in various activities in the class, and that's essentially how I engage them. But built into this sort of mixture are their critical thinking skills, are assessing arguments in ethics, we want to go on the basis of not only evidence, but what should weigh the day in terms of the best argument. What justification can we give? And of course, underlying all that is theory, the framework, and then all of these sort of adult learning theory. So what I have them do is we will either have student-produced trigger videos that I do outside of class. It was basically an excuse for me to buy a new Mac and a new iPad because I needed to record them and have some kind of editing function. So we either have that or the students actually research all their roles in class. I'll explain a little bit about why we decided to go that way. Then I ask them to diagnose the ethical problem, just like you would do a nursing diagnosis or a medical diagnosis. Then I actually have them go through a series of exercises where we can generate options. I have actually in the past used a pre and post test to try to see a couple of things. Their skills in moral diagnosis, how do they improve over the semester? And I can actually show through pretty good data that they do improve. The other thing I do is I want to see if there's any movement on an option, pre-reflection versus sort of post-reflection. And I sort of show that. I use the turning point system, and I'll show you how I do all that mess too. And then I evaluate. Always evaluate. So that's just a view from 30,000 feet of what we do in the class. Now let's get to the actual individual technologies, because this is a two-part talk. I'm going to talk to you first about the technologies that I use that I think allow us to engage students if used properly, then the actual techniques for using those technologies or just teaching techniques in general. I use Turning Point. How many of you are familiar with the Turning Point system? So it's an excellent way. The little clickers, the students usually either have them or we have a set here that you can rent out from Otis. I have my own set that I bring to class and allow the students to use in exchange for their Penn card. So I have something in case I don't get something back. And I tell them, if you don't bring that back to me, I'm taking my TA out to lunch, out to dinner with your PIN card. So I usually get pretty good return of the clickers. I make use of trigger videos, and I'll show you a little of those. I make extensive use of wikis. Now, everyone, of course, has heard of Wikipedia. It's the largest wiki. But essentially, a wiki is an editable web page that allows collaboration. So multiple people can edit a wiki. I use them both in Blackboard, and I have an external one that I use to host some of the podcasts and some of the other materials for just general consumption around the world. The other thing that I make extensive use of are podcasts, and we've also decided to upload those to iTunes University, so they're out there free of charge for the world to use. The other thing is I've developed some self-paced scenarios. I have a small business on the side when I'm not teaching, and I've actually licensed through a grant some of those technologies back to the School of Nursing to use through a generous grant. So here are the Turning Point clickers. These are the solid-state radio frequency ones, the little credit card devices. I did actually try to move to the web-based technology, and it was problematic for a whole variety of different reasons. And if you're thinking of going that way, I can probably dissuade you from doing that for a variety of different reasons. And I've actually gone back to using this. The old solid-state technology, believe it or not, is the best in this regard. So here's actually some ways or techniques that you can actually use to integrate the clickers to get more engagement out of your students. Some people have tried graded quizzes, and you can link those directly into Blackboard. I tried it. It's a fairly advanced thing to want to do, so you have to be a sort of a power user of the Turning Point system. The other is that it's a high risk that if something goes glitchy, you're messing with students' grades. And as we all know here, the students love to talk about their grades. Where's my grade? Why didn't I get this grade? Can you change my grade? Grades, grades, grades. So I actually went back to the old paper system because I wasn't willing to mess with the electronic delivery of grades and all that kind of stuff through the clickers. A very easy way, and I do this frequently, is a toss-up question in the middle of a lecture. So I warn them beforehand, you're going to get a polling question at some point. And they'll be sitting back, listening to the lecture, and I'll go, boom! Here's your Turning Point question. They're like digging for their clickers, trying to read the question. And sometimes I've actually got interactive games built in, and sometimes I have candy that I give out to the fastest finger response, and whichever class sort of wins. You can do it by class, like freshman, sophomore, non-degree student, whatever. And the students actually really like having the choice between chocolate or individually wrapped prunes. And they are phenomenally successful. I give them out at Trick or Treat as well. And the West Philly kids also, that's the first thing to go is the prunes. So it's actually good from a public health standpoint to encourage that. Some other techniques. One way that you can integrate, I don't know about you, but with a 3-hour class, I have 60 students. It's hard for me to keep track of who's there, who's not, when they would go for a break, who doesn't come back from sort of, the break. So you can actually use the clickers to measure attendance of who's there, because there's a little device ID on the back of them, and you can link it through to Blackboard if you so choose to. Sometimes I like to use on-the-fly questions as sort of litmus tests. A student will raise a question. I think it's excellent, and I'll use it to test. So you press escape on the old keyboard, you program in a new slide, and then you press go again, and then the polling is open, and they can start clicking. But there you have to be very comfortable actually interrupting your PowerPoint. And some people are not very comfortable doing that. They're afraid they may lose data or their system will crash. These are the things that happen to us. Sometimes I use it to ensure completion of group or individual exercises. I'll have a polling question. They'll say, I'm done with this exercise. And that way, whenever they press the thing, I'll know it's time to move on. It's kind of a good way to do it. The other thing I've used this for is extensive use of collecting evaluation data and also collecting data about the students and their performance. You can use 4-point, 5-point, 7-point Likert scales. And it allows me to compare their moral diagnosis against sort of what I think is going on in the case. So I can actually develop a sense of how well over the semester their moral diagnostic skills are approaching 1 on a Likert scale of 1 to 4. A very advanced function is some branching logic. You can actually have your whole lecture set up on branches, give a polling question that's designed to say, do you understand all of this material? Oh, 90% of the class understands this material. I don't have to cover this. Now we can move on to this other stuff. It's a fairly advanced function within Turning Point. Pre and post test to show changes in learning and measure success. That's fairly easy. I do that. And then, of course, gathering evaluation data, fairly easy activity once you have the phrasing of your questions down. So those are just a couple of things that you can do just with clickers. And I encourage you to experiment with those. They're actually really fun to use. I see there's questions.
I'm pretty new here, and I don't know how to use this system. Like, is there a manual? How do we learn that?
Yeah,
There are. Oh, go ahead.
As I say, each semester we have a how to use the clickers, the Turning Point. And in November, I've already set it up. She hasn't given me the exact date, but someone from Turning Point comes twice a year to the school and talks about how to use them. And then I'm available to help anybody get started using it. And I'm glad to go to the first class. Hold your hand a little bit.
I don't know who you are.
Oh, I'm Mary Ann Lafferty.
Oh,
And the school has provided money to purchase. We have about 140 clickers that are kept in the Otis. And so you can just sign up for them, distribute them in your class. A number of classes require the students, and I teach freshmen, and they have to buy them. So it's $20 for the year, because they purchase them for $40, and then they can sell them back for $20, or they can rent them for $20. So I use them quite a bit in my classes.
There are also excellent tutorials on their website, and I can give you that information towards the end.
That's the other thing, is they're very good. The website is excellent.
It is.
Marianne, where did they rent them from or get them from? If they were you were going to have the entire cohort get their
The bookstore.
The bookstore. Okay.
You can also order them online, just of their own volition, like off Amazon or Turning Point's website. But the bookstore does have them as well. Sometimes you can actually buy one from a friend. If you're registering them to track attendance, though, that's a little worrisome. You want them to have their own clicker. So as I said, these are just some things just with clickers. Now, the other thing I do is I use trigger videos. And this requires a lot of work on my part and the student's part. But it's also very fun. I get to know my students on an individual basis. I meet with them to develop their script. I film them. Sometimes we goof off. You hear a lot of shrieking and laughter, usually around 5 o'clock on a Thursday or Friday up on the 3rd floor. That's probably me and my students, or down in the sim lab. But here's a behind-the-scenes look about what's going on when I use these videos as a way to enhance instruction. So the student will research their role. They've actually captured research from previous semesters using a wiki in Blackboard. So they will actually have all kinds of research material available to them to do their research. They still have to read and digest it and understand it, but they don't have to start from scratch. So there's for that purpose, there's an authenticated group page on Blackboard, where they have I post a secret motivation for them so that they can sort of see where their particular actor is going to be going in the ethics case, and they do the research, and then they produce a script, upload that to their group page. I comment on it. We use that during filming. I use my iPad 2 to film them. It films in high definition. Students then upload that research to the wiki, so it's sort of a ever-evolving process. If something new comes up, the students upload it. I edit, produce the films on the iPad, because there's actual apps on the iPad. It saves me about 10 hours of work. I used to have to transfer this and da-da-da-da. So as soon as they're done with their video, I go chop, 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 upload YouTube. Done. So it's kind of, and it's a private YouTube channel. We don't have these things just available for anyone. Then at the end of all of this, the student, I want them to reflect on the experience. So I've created a survey monkey that then captures data about what the student thinks. And I ask them several questions like, how do you think being in this case is going to benefit your future nursing practice? What was it like to play this part? Anything, sort of just generally reflecting on the actual experience. And I have them all sign waivers because I do want to be careful and mindful. Some students are more shy than others. They don't want to be on camera, so I put them into two-person teams, one of whom does a large part of the research and script writing, and the other person sort of enacts the script. And also to make sure there's no ethical, religious, or cultural objections to being on film, plus to cover ourselves if something should happen, we have a release on file. So that's the behind the scenes in engagement, just using about a 5-minute video in class. So a lot of work goes into that, but it's really fun. I enjoy it. I wouldn't have it any other way, so to speak.
And David, so everyone has to participate in some way?
In some way. We have
so
9.
60,
We have 9 cases. We used to do all video trigger videos. Now we're doing sort of half and half, and I'll explain what we do sort of now because I'm always ever tweaking with the class. So usually there are about 4 or 5 parts. So you can generally count on about 10 students being involved in one case, being on teams of script writers and actors and playing various parts. So everyone does get to do it, and it's worth 40% of your grade. So it's a pretty substantial part of the course. Yes?
Are you going to show us?
What's that?
Are you going to show us?
I will, actually. I'll show you at the end when I'm done sort of with the podcast portion.
Okay.
And you'd be surprised how good the quality is in terms of their research and whatnot. I saw you, and then I see you over here.
Do you conduct your whole 3-hour class in the sim lab?
No, I wish. Maybe that's another grant I could probably write. I would love to actually see that happen, having sort of real-time simulation of real patients and then the ethical issues that go along with them, how to handle it. But I don't think we're ready yet.
So you have a classroom.
I have a
and then
classroom
you
just
go
like
to
this.
the sim lab.
I do all the filming in the sim lab if I need it beforehand. So like we have a patient who needs a gown and a bloody mass on her head. So I go down and I borrow, a couple of 4x4s, some gauze, some fake blood, and I get the gloves on because that stuff stains like crazy. And I mix it all up and I plop it on the student's head, and she's ready to play this character. She gets into the role. We did that a couple of weeks ago. It's kind of fun. So I have the cooperation of the folks down in the sim lab. They know me really well. I make sure, of course, not to interrupt them with their testing and whatnot. Yes?
I guess the classes I'm teaching are 80 to 90 plus students. And, I would love to do more creative stuff, but we don't have any room. There's no, to even break them into small groups or even talk to a partner.
It is a huge challenge. I teach over in Annenberg because for some reason I got moved over there. And it actually was a blessing in disguise in a way, but now I'm ready to move back now that we've done all of our renovations. Because I was trying to get 8 chairs over at Annenberg. And I didn't realize how much of a struggle it is to get 8 chairs at the University of Pennsylvania. I decided that, perhaps, it's time to move back to the nursing school where we can break things up a little differently. But that is definitely a challenge when you have a large class. How do you break them up into small groups? And I actually will show you a couple of tips and tricks on how I do that. I saw you and then you.
How much in-class time do you use for something like this?
For doing a trigger video, it's going to be about 5 or 10 minutes. Outside of class, that's probably about hour and a half per actor team. So you're looking at about 10 hours worth of work going into 10 minutes worth of actual show. But as anyone who's done film knows, that's pretty much par for the course. So it does take a lot of my time and the students' time, but it's well worth it. As I'll show you, a couple of videos are pretty high quality. I mean, the idea is to simulate as much as we can, getting into the frame of mind of being a clinician, a patient, or a family member with an ethical issue.
I was just going to offer something to the question about 80 or 90 students. I have 75 to 90 in my lectures as well. And if you take a snoop around your floor when you're teaching, frequently there are classrooms that are not always used, but some of them in breakout rooms. It's all prepared in the room in 3 different places, and the other half sent to any number of empty places from the hallway floor to the lounge to some of the breakout rooms.
Without getting permission.
No, I don't get permission, I squat. And then ask for forgiveness.
And I do likewise. I do likewise.
I'll tell Adam
It's actually, no offense, and Adam, if you watch this, it's actually best if you tell Adam ex post facto. I've found, because, I don't want to get Adam into trouble.
Yeah, we don't want to stress.
Yeah. Plus, you know Adam, it's 8 o'clock at night, he's going to answer an email. That's Adam. Something else that I've done is I've invented this Bioethics 2.0. It's my marketing ploy for bioethics. Basically, it's Web 2.0 meets bioethics. And I have a website that I host some of the podcasts on, some of the YouTube stuff, educational resources. I will probably pop up this talk onto there. People can also order books to support the website. It's all kinds of crazy things that I've kind of done. And it uses a wiki architecture from Google Sites, which is absolutely free for anyone to use. Hopefully, sometime down the road, it'd be great if we could offer, continuing education credits for these things, but, that's not something I'm capable of doing. But through Penn, we could probably do those things. And here's what it looks like. Here's the front page. It's nothing fancy. I'm not an HTML programmer. You don't have to be to do a wiki. But, over here, you can't really see it, but there's links to everything. The podcasts are there, the YouTube videos, and that's just a nice resource so that students, when they graduate, still have access to all these materials because they can't get back into Blackboard once they graduate. So I just host them externally. Here's what a podcast looks like. It's just a YouTube video. And I can show you a couple of examples of those afterwards as well. They also are on iTunes University. So if you have an iPod or an iPhone or a Mac or a PC, you can also download them straight onto iTunes. And they appear to be pretty popular. I mean, they don't give you the number of hits or anything, but people seem to like them. And I know that they're being used over an American university in Lebanon. I get an email from somebody saying, hey, these are great. Can I use these? I'm like, yeah, that's what they're there for. The other thing that I do for engagement is I push the envelope within Blackboard. The Blackboard folks and I know each other very, very well because I have to go to them at the beginning of every semester to manage the course up front because I really do push the envelope in terms of doing weird things within Blackboard. I use the wiki tool within Blackboard to manage a myriad of functions within the class. And I thought, we're dealing with millennial students. These guys are going to know wiki this, wiki that, and they're like, the eyes glaze over. I have to spend a good deal of time on the first class going over what a wiki is, here's how to access things, try to make it nice and easy for them. Sometimes I will actually host podcasts before they're ready. When we had H1N1 coming around, I'd like to tell people that my class was H1N1 compliant because I could do everything off of Blackboard, if need be, with lectures and whatnot. They also sign up for their roles as actors. They sign electronically. They sign the form for photo release. There's specific student authenticated pages for exchanging files, for emailing, for chatting, for whiteboarding, because I don't want the excuse, oh, I didn't know my other student's phone number or email. No excuses. We're doing it within the Blackboard system now, and you have no excuse for not having prepared for the script writing or the research for doing your role. The other thing that I really use it for is that it's an evolving repository for student research. So a student will come across an excellent article that's new in the literature. For doing this role, they can post that into the wiki, and becomes a permanent research repository for the students to access. The other is that it also hosts the links directly to SurveyMonkey so I can gather data about what they thought about the activities. And here's what my front page wiki looks like. You kind of can't see this, but it's done as if it were FAQs, because I figured that was the easiest way to do it. So it's like, well, there are these podcasts. How do I get to those? Well, click here. Where are the redacted slides you keep talking about? Well, they're in this area of Blackboard. So I try to keep things very simple, because if you try to give students too much, it paralyzes their decision-making, I've found. So I try to keep things a little bit simple, and I try to automate a bunch of different things with the wiki. As I said, I've already talked about this. Basically, it's an excellent way to keep track of things from semester to semester. What I found happening was students would have to invent the wheel every time I asked them to, go research what it's like to be a nurse practitioner in the psychiatric setting. And they would be, okay, I have to go start, so students would come up with these excellent resources and articles, and I said, well, just post them into this wiki in a special kind of format to keep things easy to understand. And now they're, I have about 4 or 5 semesters worth of student research that's now, that students can access. So it's a nice way to keep things organized and keep things current in terms of literature and whatnot. I also have developed some interactive cases. I'm a child of the 70s, and we had these books called Choose Your Own Adventure books when I was a kid that I loved. And I said, well, why don't we start doing ethics this way? So I'll have a situation that's, poses a dilemma, and the students get to choose, do they do something, do they not do something? Do they say something, do they not say something? And then there are consequences that result from that, and basically a branching logic kind of scenario. So that they can practice and get the mistakes out of the way and learn from their mistakes without injuring patients. So I have some of those cases that were developed. I have some of those posted on Blackboard for students to use. They're just completely self-paced, additional information. Some students, we have the kind of students who you put a footnote at the bottom of something, the student's going to look that article up, and these are intended for those students who really want the extra enrichment. So right now I have some that are just in PDF documents. This one is called War Stories. It's basically a situation where someone's talking about patients with funny names at a cocktail party, and really ought not to be, and sort of what happens as a result of that. And I've got a couple of those posted that are available for the students to use. And I've put them into e-learning modules. I have some software that allows me to quickly incorporate from PowerPoint over to Flash-based e-learning. And I've done a couple of modules. This one was actually a prototype for an NINR grant that I was hoping to get. It came back unscored, and I have to probably go back and finish some things up. But it's fairly easy, and I think we actually have a license for the software that we use. I'm not sure. But that way you can have things become self-paced. You don't have to take up class time. If you have a very rudimentary sort of PowerPoint, you can add all sorts of interactivity to it and then throw it onto and make it an e-learning module. And essentially all the podcasts that I developed are essentially e-learning modules. So those are some of the technologies that I use. Let's talk now about some of the techniques. Take creative ideas wherever you can. That's going to be the idea in our discussion, is to mine the gold and learn from each other. Vary the class activities. I actually took a lesson from a very poor evaluation that I received from a student and combined that with some of the feedback I received from my TA extraordinaire. And we changed things up and things are working much better now. I'm a firm believer in kinesthesia. Actually get up and get the blood moving. It's a 3-hour course. So actually, if I probably did a study to track a traditional 3-hour lecture, eye movement would go from my computer screen up to your screen, to Facebook, and that's about it. And so I actually have students get up, they come to the board to do things, they get into these small groups, so they actually have to move around. And I find that actually to be very beneficial. I also ask them to take responsibility for their own teaching and learning. I use a small group type of activity, and it's a learning group, so when they sign up to be on particular cases, that's now a learning group. So those 10 students will be in a learning group for the entire semester, so they get to know each other and get to participate in group activities in that way. As I said, I'm really big into multimodal learning. So I want you to listen, I want you to see, I want you to read, I want you to move, I want you to do, and all of those things take place in my course to allow that type of engagement. Now, I realize that for some courses in chemistry, how are we going to get people to move? Well, have we ever thought about actually, they use the cool little models. Why not have students actually do that? Form a benzene ring out of students. And, that'll be kind of interesting. But the other thing you need to do is you always need to evaluate your methods. Just because something worked one semester is no guarantee it's going to work for the next. I actually find that each class develops its own strange culture. And sometimes it's like, these guys don't want to be here. Other times it's like, for some reason, just one or two people get the whole class excited about everything, and that's wonderful when that happens. The other thing is that to use the evaluation. Use it to change your teaching styles and your techniques and your activities to match what students need. Now, sometimes students don't know what they need, but they'll tell you what they think they need. And sometimes that's okay. And other times you'll be like, yeah, you don't need that. Not right now. So here's one way that I adapted sort of the creative ideas. My course used to involve 9 video cases over 9 different ethics topics. And I was funded through the Innovation and Education Funds. I said, I want to be very systematic about how I do this because I want to have less bias in the evaluation data that I collect. Well, that was good for me and the grant. Students hated it. They're like, we get to do the same stupid thing over and over again. You're more concerned with your data than you are with our learning. And I was like, whoa, point taken. So I changed some things up. Let me remind you how systematic it was. That's how systematic it was. That very complex build gives you an indication of how complicated the class had to be. I had a 10-page syllabus, single-spaced, and it was just, I got great data though, but the students, I think, suffered a bit. My TA, however, always cheerful, said, you're only going to get the people who want to drive to give you those evaluations, the people who thought it was awesome sometimes don't give you the evaluations, and then you have, the 80% in the middle that aren't going to say anything. So, however, when I read the first student evaluation that said, this class is a joke, I said, wow. So when I receive feedback, I usually try to use it positively. This was kind of tough. I took a step back for a week or so, and I said, what is this student really trying to say after this class is a joke? And what they were trying to say was, I do not like doing the same thing over and over again. You need to vary the activities. Yes, the student could have given me the feedback in a different manner that wouldn't have, impinged my personal and professional identity as an instructor and put me into a deep depression. And then my TA, Ruth Krieber-Masterson, many of you know her. She's wonderful. I don't tell her this, but I think she could teach the class. So we should maybe pay her to do it, and I'll go off and do something else maybe.
No.
What's that?
No.
Okay, no. Nevertheless, she did, however, want to do her teaching residency with me. So I said, okay, as part of this, I want you to lead a whole class. And she's like, no problem. So she has a background in burn and critical care, and she had an excellent case that she wanted to talk about. She created the exercise. I went away to a conference to present a paper. The class said, we like her better than you. This was the whole systematic issue, because she sort of broke things up. And I said, well, Ruth, what can we take that you did and combine it now with what I do so that we can change things up next semester? So we met, and obviously the motto, yes, we can. And what we've done is we've changed the 9 to have sort of half of those video cases where I can gather some more systematic data, and the other half are in class. But what she was doing was actually asking the students to research all the stuff on the fly, and she had a group of students sort of being the ethics committee. I was like, I love that idea. I used to do that, and I've changed it, but let's go back to it. So what we do now is, when we do a video-based case, you saw all the stuff that goes into the video. The students have to research the role. The whole class plays the ethics committee. They use their clickers. They go through that whole framework, and then I facilitate, discussion on which options are best and why, and yada, yada. On the in-class, we gather them in their learning groups. I give them a secret motivation from the case as a group, and I say, you need to figure out what kind of things you need to research. You've got about 30 to 45 minutes to do some research, and let's say you're playing a physician. Well, I want you to know this disease that we're talking about. I want you to know what physicians think about this disease, what are the usual treatments. And it allows me to throw in some interesting clinical stuff. Like sometimes we talk about SSRIs, and I'm like, well, what's the therapeutic window for most SSRIs? And they're like, what, huh? I'm like, yeah. And so it gets them actually thinking about clinical as well, which is good. And then one of the learning groups has signed up to play the ethics committee. So they're sitting up front, nervous, and basically they get a report from the group, and then they ask some questions, and then we go through a process where we discuss all of the diagnosis, the options, and then they can vote on things with the clickers there as well. I found this to be a very useful thing. We mix it up, that way the students feel as if they're not getting the same thing every week in terms of process. So I do like it. Now let me talk to you a little bit about why I think kinesthesia, or movement, is so important in engaging your students. It's a 3-hour class. They need some movement. If you don't give them a break, people are going to leave, they're going to fall asleep, they're going to look at Facebook, they're going to do all the things that you don't want them to. The videos involve movement. So when I show a video, they have to pay attention. I don't know about you, but I find movies very engrossing. So if you can show videos or video clips to enhance the point you're doing in your lecturing, that's an excellent way of doing things. The traditional lecture, I already told you, is most times it's going to be eyes on screen, eyes on the lecturer or the professor, eyes on Facebook. And, we can't have that. We don't want students, posting on Facebook during your lecture. The other is to make sure that when you do these things, you can incorporate multimodal learning. So the way I do this is they have to listen and watch a podcast. That's a video. So they have to actually do some movement. They have to do some thinking. The video serves the same thing. They have to move into their learning group. I may send them out in the hall or split them up, whatever. They have to keep their eyes on their laptop, their eyes on their fellow students, the eyes on the committee. So there's a lot of movement in terms of that as well. Using the clickers, they have to then pay attention to what they're clicking. So it's not just falling. It's not like a long drive where you're just sitting there like this. You're actually doing some movement. They have to come up in front of the class. Sometimes I'll ask them to write something on the grease boards. I sometimes use these sticky grease board kind of things that I ordered, and sometimes they have to come up and close them, and we'll move them around. It's a good way to do some affinity mapping. And basically what this does is it helps change the focus or location of the instruction from various points in the classroom, and it's actually a good thing, I think. I think it actually creates better blood flow to the brain or something. I don't know, they get more creative and their problem solving. I asked them to take on responsibility for their own teaching and learning. So they're in their learning groups. They need to have a rotating leader who helps organize them. That person then reports back to the ethics committee in terms of what this person would think about the case, whichever. So they have to access, interpret, instruct their peers on topics in the peer-reviewed literature. They have to have independent thinking when they're doing their clickers, because that's their own thoughts. But when they're within groups, they have to then collaborate. And the reason I do that is nursing, of course, is becoming more collaborative. They need to know how it is to work in groups, and I think that's very important. Sometimes I innovate. In the fall, I had some more funds from the Innovation Fund, and I said, what would be really interesting, that nice thing that I do with the branching logic on the paper, can I translate that into the classroom? And I found out an interesting way of doing it. When you're considering various options for implementation in an ethics case, I tell the students, all right, let's figure out the positive and negative consequences of each and map those out in a tree-like structure. And it really gets them thinking ahead of, whoa, if I do this, these things are likely to happen. I need to therefore think ahead, because one of the skills my wife said she relies on when she was a critical care nurse is thinking, just like in chess, 5 steps ahead. And if you're not doing that, then your patient, 1, 2, 3, 4, however many you're taking care of, something could go very, very wrong if you're not a strategic thinker. So I do that in terms of ethics as well. Here are some references. I've published a paper on this. I have more papers probably yet to come. My website is up and available. All the resources there are free for you to use. I'm going to end sort of the lecture portion. I want to hear your questions. I want to talk. I'll keep recording that. And then I'll show you some of the videos and things like that that you probably wanted to see. So what questions can I answer? I've inundated you. Yes?
So I have found that I try to be creative in class. This is talking about graduate level clinical course, so
Yes.
any part of. And the students, I hate to say it, but they're like wedded to PowerPoint even if we're not handing in